Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of my monthly movie review roundup where I do a brief review of the films I've seen in the past month or so. So I watched quite a few films this month. I watched 3 films by the filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki. I watched My Neighbour Totoro, Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle. This film director is one of the few big name film directors who's kind of evaded me. I've seen at least maybe 1 or 2 from all the kind of big names that people associate with the greats of cinema and whatnot, but never really Miyazaki. And maybe it's partly because his films are animated, and maybe there was part of me that thought, oh, well, it's a cartoon at the end of the day, something like that. I don't know, some kind of stereotype about animated films. But I mean, I watched 3 of them in 1 month, so that pretty much tells you what I think of them. My Neighbour Totoro and Spirited Away, I watched in English, the English dub. That was because I watched them with my kids. Howl's Moving Castle, I watched in the original language. Usually I'm a sub guy, not a dub guy. I like to watch films in the original language, and then I'm fine with subtitles. I think that you get more of the original package. That's the way the film was intended. But obviously, the kids won't be reading the subtitles, so I went with the English for the other 2. And they were really good films. I kind of see why people love his films. Aside from all, the allegories and the metaphors for war and the hand-drawn animation, all that kind of stuff. Just as whimsical films with a real sense of childlike adventure. That's what these films feel like. They've got that children's sense of wonder, especially the way the stories unfold. I did hear Miyazaki sometimes doesn't even use scripts. He storyboards his films, and then he said something like he allows the storyboard to tell the story, something like that. And you can kind of feel it, The stories in his films sometimes go into some random, wild places. And it's usually involving children who are in some kind of predicament. Maybe they're moving house, or maybe they've got a parent who's ill, something like that. And they'll stumble across a magical world with spirits and fairies and goblins and ghouls and witches and all sorts. My Neighbour Totoro was the most recent one I watched. I think that was Miyazaki's first major film. That was probably my least favourite, even though I did enjoy it. Partly because with the kids, they enjoyed it as well, but it does try your patience a little bit. It is quite a slow film. Most of the fantastical elements are kind of to the side, because it's basically about 2 young girls who are moving house with their father. The mother is ill, and that the stuff you associate with that makes up the bulk of the story. Them getting used to the new house, them dealing with the fact that their mother is ill, the father trying to balance work life with being with his 2 daughters, and there just happens to be a mystical creature that the 2 girls stumble across, and the story goes from there. A very short film. In some ways, the creatures are not really needed for the story. You could actually remove them, pad out the runtime a little bit with some drama, and you'd have a solid family drama there. Spirited Away is probably the best one. That one had some, again, real sense of wonder and drama, but it was quite scary as well. There's a sense of dread and horror with this film. A young girl is in a car with her parents. They stumble across a kind of ghost town, and there's food at one place. The parents start scoffing their faces. The girl's getting a bit weirded out. She goes for a bit of a walk, and then all of a sudden she stumbles across basically a bathhouse for spirits that's run by this freaky witch. She can't find her parents, and the story just goes from there. And again, it's one of those. These movies, they kind of keep you engrossed because you just never know where the story is going to go, what's going to happen next, and you really find yourself rooting for the protagonists who just found themselves in a world where they could be turned into an animal by this freaky witch and whatnot. And again, one of the things I like about this film, as proven by the fact that I watched it with my kids, is that adults can enjoy it simultaneously with children. The children were on the edge of their seat, and I was having a great time with it. I admire the creativity and all the different creature designs and how the story unfolds and where it goes, and they're just, in the mix of the drama. Howl's Moving Castle was probably my favourite, maybe partly because I watched it first, and it was my first experience of this film director, but I think maybe it's the characters in that one. I really love the collection of main characters, this kind of ragtag group who found themselves together. With this one, a young girl is transformed in, and again with this one the world building is very good because the character the main girl, she just kind of feels like she's a small part in a much, much bigger story. And we're only aware of her part in this story. There's other battles going on. There's antagonists and protagonists battling it out. And she's just kind of thrown into the mix. But she basically is turned into an old lady by this witch who is taking revenge on someone who the witch thought was associated with the young girl. And then she goes on basically a journey to have herself transformed back. She's heard of this thing called Howl's moving castle. It's literally basically like a scrap heap that moves with legs. It's moved with magic, and maybe this wizard will be able to help her out. And again, this one was maybe the most fun out of all of them. It gave you a wide range of emotions. It gave you a lot of laughs. It made you sad. You feel sorry for the girl who's been turned into an old lady. The characters were very endearing. Some of the animation in this one was really good. Some battle sequences and whatnot. But I can't get now why people go on about this film director. What I've seen, I've been very impressed with, and I am looking to watch the rest of the director's films. The next film on my list is Gore Virbinski's A Cure for Wellness. This was made in 2016, but it's still Virbinski's most recent film, which I'm quite sad about. It's a shame because I haven't loved all of his films, but when there's some directors who you just get, they have a style, they have a flair. Like John Carpenter, even his bad films like Ghost of Mars, I actually enjoyed because there's just something about the director. But Virbinski, I think, is actually a very talented film director. You give him enough cash and he'll give you a lot of creativity. He'll give you, a good action adventure film. I think him not working has something to do with, maybe having a bad time of it on The Lone Ranger. That film flopped. It lost a lot of money. And from what I hear, Virbinski kind of got turned off at the idea of making big budget Hollywood films. But he hasn't made anything since A Cure for Wellness. And the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean films were the best ones. Rango was a good movie. And this guy's got talent. I would like him to be making more films. Cure for Wellness kind of shows that he has talent as well. This was quite a long film, around about 2.5 hours. It's got that kind of Shutter Island-esque vibe, where a guy goes into this kind of hospital, mental asylum place, and something's not quite right, other staff in on it. Is the head experimenting on the patients? That kind of stuff. And in this one, a young, ambitious executive from some company is sent by his superiors to retrieve his CEO from a mysterious remote wellness center that is located somewhere in Europe. Now, even the reason why they're trying to bring him back is actually nefarious. He's not even a likable person. They didn't make the protagonist likable. He's someone who's entrenched in this kind of capitalist machine where he's trying to climb the ladder and whatnot. And basically some kind of fraud has been committed at the company, and they need the CEO to take the blame. So they need to bring him back. He'll take the heat for it, maybe go to prison or whatnot. So that's the inception of the story. He arrives at the wellness center. The staff kind of are flogging him off. They don't really allow him to see the guy. He starts to feel that the medical center's treatments, which usually revolve around water, are not quite what they seem. Initially, he thinks that, they're just basically rinsing these rich people, just giving them glasses of water and whatnot, a few exercises, and they think that, they're being cured for diseases that they don't even have. And the film starts to unravel and whatnot. See, with these kind of mysteries, these movies rely on having a good, strong ending. The ending always makes or breaks them. Now, for 2 hours or so, A Cure for Wellness is a really intriguing, solid mystery thriller. I had a really good time with it. I really enjoyed it. It was brilliantly shot. Again, Virbinski's visual flair that I was talking about. It's a really good looking movie. It keeps you on edge. It keeps you wondering what is going on. What is the deal here? But where the film kind of falls apart is when the deal is unraveled and you find out what's going on. And the whole thing with the cure as well, with the water and these eels, eels are constantly brought up in the movie. It ends up being like a footnote. It's explained with just one line of dialogue. And the real mystery ends up being this kind of really farcical thing that belongs in some kind of, 1960s Hammer movie. Which I guess, in some ways, A Cure for Wellness is referencing. It is kind of playing off of that kind of stuff. But it's a movie that's really good for about 2 hours. But it doesn't land the ending. Without going into spoilers, I just didn't think what happened at the end was all that great. And again, it's just simply a case of a really good film director who's got a really good crew around him, but the screenplay is just lacking and just a tad bit simple, really, after you've engrossed yourself in 2.5 hours of movie. It also tries to do something with the whole idea of this kind of capitalist machine that we all live in, and how that is a disease and we need to be cured from that. But it just kind of drops it, halfway through and then brings it up near the end. Again, it's trying to do too many things, It does toy with the whole idea of, is the main character actually a patient? Is he actually insane himself? And just like Shutter Island. And then it kind of tosses that out the window and, oh no, it's this. Maybe that's actually the case, I wonder if you actually delve into the history of the making of this film, you might find that they didn't know how to end it. They didn't know what the mystery was and they kept changing it every 2 minutes. That does happen. And it does feel like that kind of film. And it's the ending which really drags it down, to be honest. They held it together for so long, but then it all just gets a bit silly at the end. So there's a small little film from 1960 I watched called 13 Ghosts. This isn't the remake. That's more well known. It's the original one. You're going to see quite a few horror films on this list today. Just so happens that they had a lot on TV, so I watched it. This one, a family inherits what proves to be a haunted house, but a special pair of goggles allows them to see their ghostly tormentors. Now, 13 Ghosts is kind of billed as a film that is a horror movie, but doesn't really take itself seriously. I wonder, though, if that's basically people using the whole it doesn't take itself seriously thing as an excuse, because it isn't really that scary. Because I think it does take itself seriously at times, There's quite some heavy stuff in here, like a guy trying to murder a child. It's just that it is a bit silly, it's a bit naff in places, and parts that I imagine were supposed to be scary sometimes come off as funny. Like the whole goggles thing, there's these ghost goggles, and when people put it on and they're looking all shocked and everything, they come off as looking kind of buffoonish. It's nothing more really than just simply a decent B movie. It's made by the guy who made House on Haunted Hill, and it has Margaret Hamilton in it, who played the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. It's not too scary, to be honest, and some parts don't make sense. And it's one of those where I think at the time it probably would have been scary for some people because it has loads of spooky effects, and so much so that it sometimes feels like a showreel for the visual effects artists for their special effects, superimposing an image on top of the film to create a kind of ghoulish effect and all that kind of stuff. But that stuff is really outdated. It doesn't look good in today's day and age. It's not like, say, Psycho, where made in the same year, the characters are really good, the scares aren't reliant on special effects, so the film ages better. Again, like I said, ultimately just a little B movie that isn't really worth watching, to be honest. I watched Legend with Tom Hardy, the film by the Cray brothers, but I won't talk about that because I have a full video on it planned for the main channel. Another film I watched, made in 1971, is called The House That Dripped Blood. This movie stars Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, among others, though they are never on screen together, because this is an anthology movie. I like the idea of horror anthology movies, but the thing is, in actuality, many of them turn out not to be very good. Dead of Night is the stone cold British classic from the 1940s, which I still think is the gold standard. The House That Dripped Blood is probably a 6 out of 10. It doesn't quite match up. Some of the stories are very good, some of them are not so good. The backdrop is basically a police officer investigating something, and he's being told by another one something to do with this house, and he's telling him that this house has a history and there's all sorts of ghoulish things that have gone on, and then he starts telling him the stories. To be honest, the anthology stories themselves, in many ways, they feel like completely disconnected things and are only really superficially connected to the house. It's not. The film does try to tie it all together in the end, saying that the house basically takes like your fantasies that are in your head and kind of amplifies them, something like The Shining. But I didn't think it was really necessary to connect all the different stories to the house. So some of the stories include a novelist who is writing a book, and he's writing like a really evil character as the antagonist. And then he becomes convinced that that actual character is stalking him in real life. This one was okay. It didn't really make a lot of sense by the end of it, because it turns out that the wife was scheming with this guy to try and turn the guy crazy. But, like, for example, you've got a scene where he's trying to show the wife that, look, there he is, and the bad guy is standing right there. And then the writer will say, look, he's over there now. And then we'll see a shot of him over there. But if it turned out this was all real and this was an actual person, then wouldn't he just have walked from there to there instead of appearing there? It's in the same room. Anyway, it was decent, a little bit silly. The second one stars Peter Cushing as one of a pair of two love rivals who visit a wax museum. And they see a person, one of the museum statues who looks like one of their old romantic muses, and they start to become obsessed with it. The material is a little bit weak on this one, but it kind of tries to do something with the visuals. It's kind of Mario Bava, surreal, strong reds and greens and whatnot, but it was a bit of a middling segment. Third one was okay, I thought. It was with Christopher Lee, who plays the frightened but stern father of a young girl who seems to hold a secret, and a young babysitter comes along. She tries to get this young girl out of her shell, who the father doesn't allow to go to school or be among other kids. And this is actually one of the more thought-provoking ones, because it turns out the young girl is a witch. She's into some kooky stuff, as was her mother before she died. And it kind of, because of the way Lee treats her, it does kind of bring up the question as to, was she always like that? Was she always going to be like that? And Lee was justified in basically doing what is basically child abuse? Or is it a case of, because of the way she was treated by her father, she ended up delving into these dodgy things? So again, bit of food for thought with this one. The last one is about a pompous actor who's starring in a B-movie picture, and he buys a cloak that turns him into a real vampire. This one was a bit silly. By the time this one came around, you kind of know that the film is not taking itself too seriously. So, I mean, if you're a fan of these actors, if you're a fan of B-movie horror films from the 70s, British films, and maybe, it's worth watching, this wasn't too bad. You're not going to find it scary or anything, but obviously if it's the kind of stuff that you like watching, then hey, give it a go. The next film I watched was East is East. Now, this is quite a famous film, but it made a lot of money. It basically tells the tale of a Pakistani father in England in the 1970s who finds his authority challenged by his increasingly anglicised children. The movie is a dramedy, I guess that's what they'd call it today, although I do think it would have been a better film if it committed to one or the other, either be an all-out serious drama, because there's some real serious stuff that happens in this film, like domestic violence, children splitting up from their parents, all sorts of stuff, and there's a lot of slapstick farcical comedy, really kind of bottom of the barrel toilet humor, a lot of vulgar stuff, and maybe it should have just become a slapstick comedy instead, but it kind of tries to play both parts, and that's very difficult to do, and I don't think it quite pulls it off. In the end, it's neither here nor there. I can see why it was popular at the time, because it does speak to a certain part of the UK and a certain demographic, and it does speak to the kind of immigrant experience of first generation, second generation British Pakistanis, culture clashes and all that kind of stuff. Maybe I had a bit too maybe my expectations were a bit too high, and I kind of thought it was going to do a real kind of deep dive into all these kind of themes and whatnot. This, really authoritarian Pakistani father trying to mitigate his children who have just grown up in a different environment to him, and their values and everything are different. He's losing control of them. He also married a British white woman who's partly on his side, partly on the children's side, and it was okay, I thought. I would probably give it a 6 out of 10. I think for its length, about 1.5 hours, it didn't quite have the time to delve into what it wanted to do. I think one of the things they should have done was make the father have less children, because I think he had about 5, and the film kind of delves into each one's story here and there. And again, that's something you could do with if you do it properly, but in the end it just kind of feels like the film feels unfocused. Like, who's the main character here? It is supposed to be the father, but then we look at one of the sons going into parties and trying to get a girlfriend and all that kind of stuff, and we follow him for a bit, and then we just ditch him, and then we go into another brother, and it kind of goes like that. It's a bit all over the place, and to be honest, it's actually difficult to remember who was who from among the brothers. I feel the film should have been a bit more tighter, maybe, or because it kind of has a meandering episodic feel, almost as if it's an episode in a much larger TV show. And I know that kind of speaks to good world building, but you do need a bit more meat there. So another film I watched was 1973's The Last Detail, starring Jack Nicholson. one of his early roles, which I've yet to see. It says it's about two Navy men are ordered to bring a young offender to prison, but decide to show him one last good time along the way. And that's really what it's about. If you've seen a lot of low-key, gritty Hollywood New Wave films from the early 70s, even, other Jack Nicholson films like Five Easy Pieces or Easy Rider, you kind of know what vibe you're going to get with these kind of films. Very low-key, very realistic. Half of it seems like it's improvised and is just kind of showing you these people's lives, without even there being the feeling that the film has a beginning, middle, end. But anyway, I'm not really here to talk about the nature of Hollywood New Wave movies. But what the film describes itself as, it pretty much does on the tin. These two officers who have to transport a prisoner from one place to another. A prisoner who, by the way, is going to prison for simply stealing a few dollars, but he ended up stealing it from the wrong person, a very influential person, so he gets sent down for a long time. The movie has a kind of week in the life kind of feel, because they know they have a few days before they can get there, so they say that, okay, well, let's show this guy a good time. But the prisoner himself is probably one of the most interesting characters, because he starts off as someone quite meek, quite willing to follow authority. As Jack Nicholson's character points out at one point, he'll probably be happy in prison. He's probably happy he's going there because it'll be a life where he just follows orders and he's never kind of broken out of that shell. The entire film is the other two basically trying to break him out of that shell. They take him to restaurants, they take him ice skating, they hook him up with some women. And there's a great irony in the film because they basically show him that life is worth living, that life is good, that by the time the end of the film comes around, when the inevitable happens and they have to take him to prison, by that point, he doesn't want to go and he loves life and he's sad and distraught at the fact that he has to go. It's quite a nice, touching, human, anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian film where three guys just have a good time with one another. It refuses to give in to sappiness whilst at the same time having a bit of pathos about it. One film I watched was Roman Polanski's The Tenant. Now, when you think of Polanski, when you think of Polanski, there's other things you think about. But in terms of his movies, you can often think of, creepy, freaky apartments with weird extras and shenanigans and unknown things going on. We've got Rosemary's Baby. There's Frantic with Harrison Ford. Repulsion is another one. And for the Polanski fans, The Tenant is probably right up your street if those are the kind of films you like. I thought it was pretty good. I'd give it like a solid 7 out of 10. The film is described as a bureaucrat who rents a Paris apartment where he finds himself drawn into a rabbit hole of dangerous paranoia. Sounds straight up Polanski, doesn't it? So basically, he gets this apartment where the previous tenant tried to kill herself. She threw herself out of the window, but she survived and she went to hospital. And for whatever reason, maybe just out of morbid curiosity or maybe because he wants to ensure that he'll actually get the house and be able to relax and put all of his things out, he goes and visits the woman, which is a bit of a disturbing scene because she's clearly in agony at the hospital. And the tenant, who Roman Polanski plays himself, meets with the woman's close friend. And the story kind of goes from there. This is a psychological horror that really goes places that you don't expect, You think that, a bit like The Cure for Wellness, it might be a film where the people who own the apartment or other tenants are in on some shady shenanigans. Maybe they're all out to get the tenant, something like that. But it ends up being a bit more, It's a bit of a surreal movie. One could argue it's similar to Shutter Island in the sense that it's delving into the mind of someone who's just not quite well. It really does feel like a film that gets the anatomy of paranoia, insanity, and alienation very right. Kafkaesque is probably how you describe the film. It's a disturbing, creepy film about paranoia and delusion. There's many scenes in it that are really chilling, but at the same time, I'm not sure if this was intentional, but I found the film really funny as well. Like, for example, there's again, very creepy. Polanski starts to notice that when he stares out of his window, and there's only one toilet in this building, he can see the toilet from across the apartment, and he sees day after day other tenants who just stand in the toilet, just staring at the wall, not doing anything, not saying anything for a very long time, and he's wondering what's going on. And occasionally it looks like they're looking at him, And sometimes they do turn around and look at him, and it's kind of freaky. But again, it's one of those where if you remove the context, it's pretty funny, because it's like they think to themselves, I'm trying to do a shit, and who is this guy who keeps staring at me? There's also Polanski dresses up as a woman in some scenes for some reasons, part of the whole paranoia thing. And again, there's many scenes from there that become quite funny. There was one part where some kid is playing out in the park or something, and he loses his boat in the lake, and he's crying, and his mum, I think, goes to retrieve it, and Polanski just comes up to the kid. And you think maybe he's going to say, oh, there. Maybe Polanski will try and get the boat and he'll drown or something freaky will happen. And he just slaps the kid full pellet and walks away. Again, pretty funny. But quite an effective film. Unlike A Cure for Wellness, this is a movie that sticks the landing. So yeah, if creepy Polanski movies are your thing, then this is probably worth watching. So there's another very low-key 1960s horror movie I watched called Night of the Eagle. Which is about a woman who may be a witch defends her husband from forces attempting to harm him. I gotta be honest, this one I was only really watching half-heartedly. I was doing something else while it was on TV, and since it was on, I just thought, okay, I'll watch the whole thing. So there's a very successful teacher in an environment, a neighborhood where people seem to be jealous of each other, and it turns out that some people within the community may be doing, voodoo and black magic and getting mixed up in that kind of stuff, including the guy's own wife. And when he calls her out on it, even though she says, I'm only doing that stuff to protect you, he forces her to stop doing it, to throw things in the fire. And then he finds that his life starts to kind of get worse, and maybe there was truth to this stuff. Maybe it's real, and maybe it was actually protecting him because everybody else is doing it, and the only change now is that this husband and wife aren't doing it, so they've lost their protection. It's a low-budget witchcraft film, which is mildly spooky. I remember there being one decent shot where, because the guy's mind or something is playing tricks with him, some massive, oversized eagle is chasing him. And the way they switched between a real-life eagle and what is obviously some kind of puppet or something was pretty good. Can't say I have too much to say about this film, though that probably is because of the manner in which I watched it. So another movie I watched was Wild Bill. Not the very infamous movie made in the 90s, but one more recently made in 2011. It is, I guess, what you could call a British gangster film, or just a kind of drama that involves gangsters, kind of Cockney, Ray Winstone kind of East End style characters. If you're familiar with these kind of films, you'll recognize a lot of faces from guys like, Guy Ritchie movies and whatnot. And in the movie, a toughened convict is released from prison, and he tries to reinsert himself into the life of his two sons, who were abandoned by their mother and left to fend for themselves. He has a history with some of the underworld characters in the town, and they're a bit uncomfortable with him being back and a bit weighted out by the fact that he's going straight and he's got a job as like a lollipop man or a sign man or something really meager. And they start to want him out of the way, especially seeing as though his two sons are starting to work for these drug dealers. And while Bill obviously wants to insert himself into the life of his two sons as a father figure, he wants to protect them from the life of a dealer. He says quite blatantly to one of them that, look, I did time in prison. Is that where you want to go? This is the natural conclusion to a lifestyle that you want to be part of. And so the film kind of goes from there. It's a kind of, I guess you could describe it as a council estate, British, gritty, ultra low budget. I think it was made for something like £300,000. Western, really, because that's what it feels like, It's not a very stylish, polished Sergio Leone, Clint Eastwood Western, but the kind of mechanics are all there, ending with like a big showdown, a couple of brawls instead of a couple of shootouts. Crucially, it has a soul, and it isn't trying to glorify the kind of thug, mandem, roadman kind of lifestyle. The main key journey is the father going from someone who was entrenched in that kind of lifestyle and who doesn't really care about his sons. He actually wants to leave initially. He doesn't want to be part of them, but they're forced upon him by the authorities, and going to a place where him, his two sons, and some woman, they become a kind of family by the end of the film. The eldest son, played by Will Poulter, also goes through quite a journey. Obviously, he's had it tough, abandoned by his mother. He becomes the father figure to his younger brother. He's been protecting him all these years. He also tries to have his own life, get a girlfriend. There's a girl he likes, and all of a sudden, his father, who selfishly had himself locked up because of his lifestyle, wants to come back and be the father again, and there's conflict and tension there. It really is a solid directorial debut, especially when you consider how much it was made for, and the fact that it could easily have just gone into, being a movie that tries to be all cool and whatnot, but instead, it remembers what it's actually about, which is about the father and the children. So I finally got around to watching Damien Chazelle's Whiplash, one of the films that he's really famous for, starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. In the movie, a promising young drummer enrolls at a cutthroat music conservatory where his dream of greatness are mentored by an instructor who will stop at nothing to realize a student's potential. So in this movie, J.K. Simmons plays that instructor who draws the line between inspiring students to aspire to greatness and basically that red line where how much pushing of a student is too far, how much of it goes to a place where you're basically abusing them, and maybe you have your own nefarious reasons. You want to pump your own ego. Maybe you've got some kind of delusions of grandeur as an instructor where you want to be the one who found the next Beethoven or whatever. I don't know anything about music, I don't know anything about drumming, but the movie did very well to kind of put you in that zone where you kind of see where the main character is going wrong, where he's going right. It's interesting because this movie, especially in today's day and age with political correctness and whatnot, it kind of sidesteps all of that kind of stuff. It's not a film that really, in the world that these characters exist in, where what is politically correct is used as any kind of yardstick to measure a person's success, growth, or journey or whatnot. The instructor is openly hurling abuses that would get you sacked in a normal environment. So this is taking place in a different sphere of society where it's all about the artist and the artistry and music and the respect of that as an entity, as a phenomenon. And the gist is from the instructor that anything goes. I can do anything to you because I'm trying to get the best out of you. And if you can't achieve that greatness, then you're off, you're out. It doesn't matter how hard you work, it doesn't matter how long you've worked for. He gets rid of people like that in the film from his music group. Now, J.K. Simmons' performance, the acting all around, Miles Teller was good as well, but Simmons was fantastic in the film. Very scary. It'll come as a surprise to many people who are familiar with his works in the Spider-Man films, for example, where he's a riot and he's really funny. But I've seen Oz, where he played Vern Schillinger, an absolutely terrifying character. So I was quite familiar with how scary Simmons could be. And in fact, in some ways, it does feel like if Vern Schillinger got out of prison and became a music instructor, that's what this film is. It's a good movie, It's quite layered. There's a few things it not necessarily has to say, but has to ponder on about ambition and mentoringship, how much is too much, all of that kind of stuff. Very intense, and it's really a showcase of how the subject of a movie is really not important when it comes to how good a movie is or not, because you look at a movie like this, what it's about and the story, and you kind of think, how good can a movie like this be? And especially for me, who has no interest in music. But it was solid, some astonishing performances, and really, really intense. The next film on my list is Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. This is a new one that came out. Didn't seem to make that much money, unfortunately. My only familiarity with Dungeons and Dragons, I don't know anything about the board game or anything, is the infamous movie that was released in the early 2000s, which, funnily enough, I was actually a really big fan of because I was a kid back then. And, what do children know about what makes a good movie or not? I just saw, swords and dragons and fire breathing stuff and all that. And I was enthralled by it. It was only later I found out how much of a joke the film was considered. And this new one is absolutely solid, honestly. It's bizarre how action, adventure, comedy films, fantasy films, movies that sprinkle in a little bit of horror, Just in general, the adventure genre is so poor, so crap, and partly because, we're seeing overuses of CGI, poor scripts that seem like they're made by AI. They throw in guys like Jay Courtney or whatnot who have no talent and try to make a big star out of them. But in general, when you look at superhero movies, you look at Jurassic Park, all of these kind of films, they're crap, most of them, aren't they? Let's be honest. And Dungeons & Dragons kind of looks like it's made in the same vein, but it is actually very good. It's solid. It's got a good script, it's got good characters, a ragtag group of people that you really do enjoy. And I do feel that it's a solid addition to the fantasy genre. The action is great, you can actually see what's going on, and I honestly think it's an absolutely solid addition to the fantasy genre. The story is kind of, one of those as you'd expect. A character who does a prison break is trying to get back to his daughter, and he has to go on a quest and get this item and all that kind of stuff. But never does it really feel like it's going through the motions, or it's adding a new quest to pad out the runtime, or it's introducing a new character for no other reason than to make the plot longer. It's very simply a refreshingly entertaining, big budget Hollywood action adventure fantasy film. It was well shot and it was really funny. The cast seemed to have good chemistry and the VFX was really good. In some places it's not so great, but in some places it actually plays on that. There's one scene where character is making some kind of magic apparition of a person, and because the magic is not so good, the guy's getting distracted. They use some really bad, intentionally bad CGI to make the guy's face go all weird, and it's a very funny comedic scene. So it's a shame if, what I hear is true, that the movie didn't make a lot of money and it flopped. I mean, it's not an original movie in the sense that it's based off a famous game and there have been previous iterations, but it's a movie with the effort made and the execution where it really did deserve to do better. A recent film called Talk to Me is the final film on this list. And in this film, when a group of friends discover how to conjure spirits using an emboldened hand, so one of them has a hand which may belong to some kind of voodoo person, who knows. But when you put it in front of you and you grip it, you end up seeing a spirit, someone who's dead, and you end up actually getting possessed. They become hooked on the new thrill until one of them goes too far and opens the door to the spirit world, forcing them to choose who to trust, the dead or the living. Now, the main character in this film, her mother overdosed and topped herself, and she doesn't have the best relationship with her father, so she's a bit messed up. Now, it's quite an interesting film in the way that it does feel like if supernatural possessions were real and it's something you could record, this is the way the modern day Generation Z would actually go about it. They'd actually have fun with it. They'd make Instagram, TikTok videos on it, because that's what happens. A lot of this movie is they basically take it in turns to do the hand thing, get possessed, and then they do loads of really kooky stuff while they're possessed and everybody else has a great time recording it. It's quite an apt allegory, I think, for taking drugs. And just like with drugs, if you go too far, bad things happen, because there's certain rules, like you're not allowed to be attached to the spirit thing for over a certain amount of seconds, and if you do, it gets too much power over you, and then things can happen. The story really gets kicked into gear when she does the hand thing, and then she actually sees her mother, and she wants to ask her about why she killed herself, did she actually kill herself, or was she killed, all that kind of stuff. And there is an element where, because I've seen so many movies, I could kind of see where it was going. I knew kind of where the story beats were headed, and I remember saying to my wife, imagine if when she does it, the main character, she sees her mother, and then obviously that's what happened. There's a few moments like that, but that doesn't stop it from being a good movie. There were many talking points, even right up until the very end, like what exactly happens at the end, and why did it happen? Much is made of the fact that in the beginning, it may have actually been her mother who she spoke to, but later on, when she tries to do the hand thing again, because she gets addicted to it, she wants to meet her mother, in other words, get that high, the whole drug allegory. She does meet her mother, but that might not actually be her mother. It might actually be an evil dead person pretending to be her mother. Or maybe she never even met her mother. Maybe, obviously, that is a bit of a big coincidence. Maybe even the very first iteration of her mother was some kind of spooky kook trying to set her up. So yeah, a pretty good story, a good possession movie. A good spooky ghost story where the main characters are a bunch of insufferable, annoying teenagers. It's an entertaining film, if a little predictable. Probably best viewed if you're with people, with mates, with a bunch of drinks, just like the characters in the movie are when they have the whole parties with the hand thing. So there you have it. That's my monthly movie review roundup. If you've seen any of these films on the list, let me know what you think of them down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.